One of the things I like about Instagram is that it's a great way to discover new micro brands, which is where I originally ran across Vaer. I immediately liked their designs, but I became really interested in the company when I discovered they were based out of California in Venice Beach. You see, while I live in Texas, I'm originally from Southern California, born and raised in San Diego. And while I love Texas, and it's been over a decade since I moved out, part of me will always be a Californian, which means if it's warm enough, I'll be trying to wear shorts, and as long as the stars aren't out, I'm probably wearing sunglasses. Not to mention, I still speak fluent dude. So I'm immediately interested in a California-based company. But when I discovered that not only are they based out of Venice Beach, but they also assemble the watches in LA, I immediately reached out to the company to find out more. And in the process, they graciously offered to send me a watch to review. Now, Vaer has said that their initial goal was to create the perfect $150 watch, and they started this whole process with a very minimalist classic watch, and then followed that with a more modern field watch. And their newest addition is this Heritage collection, which I think is more of a vintage field watch. I'm not sure if I'd say it's a perfect watch, but they're definitely on the right track. And I will say that it's a damn good one-watch solution for most people, especially if you live in California. I'll explain what I mean by that later. But let's first really start to look at the details of the Heritage Dark, and let's start by first talking about the movement. As you can see, it is quartz, specifically a Swiss Ronda 715, which is an affordable quartz workhorse. I wanted to talk about it first, as I know some people always prefer an automatic movement. Vaer is currently designing their first automatic, which will hopefully come out later this year. So if that's something that interests you more, then taking a closer look here will give you an idea of what to expect. Spec-wise, this is listed at 40mm, and with calipers, I found it to be just shy of that without the crown. Width, it's closer to 43mm. Lug to lug, it's just shy of 48, which I personally find to be perfect for my 7-inch wrist. And I especially have a soft spot for 40mm field watches. Usually they always seem to be a little bigger or a little smaller. Now the Heritage has a thickness of 9.4mm, or perhaps I should say thinness, as it's slender enough to wear with anything. Lug width is 20mm, which is my preferred size, as I have a ton of 20mm straps already. It's also fairly lightweight at 63 grams, and that's with this leather strap. Water resistance is 100 meters, and that is with a screw-down crown. So you should be good for almost anything life throws at you. Now price varies from about $165 to $199, all depending on which strap options you choose. The case is stainless, with mostly a brushed finish, with the exception of the edge on the bezel, which has a little bit of an eye-catching shine. The finishing here is excellent, especially for the price, and that includes a nice finish inside the lugs. The edge of the case has an ever so slightly rounded edge, and it also has an amazingly smooth finish, which is a strange thing to compliment, but as soon as you'll get one, you'll know exactly what I mean as soon as you pick it up. And that smooth edge contrasts nicely with some very nice knurling on the signed crown at the 3. The crown is a good size, and I never had any issue in screwing it in or out, and I love how well the crown is integrated in the case. Without any crown guards, it just looks like a regular crown while it's screwed in. A standard screw-down case back is at the rear, which does state its water resistance, Swiss movement, and assembled in LA. And one more thing about the movement. Battery life here should be about 5 years, and if you're worried that you're going to ruin the water resistance the first time you change the battery, I think you're worrying too much. As long as you don't mangle the seal on the back of the case back and you put it back on right, you should be good to go. What's much more important to worry about is to make sure that you always screw back down the crown. One nice thing I want to point out is that the lugs do sweep down just below the case back, with the holes for the spring bars right at the tip of those lugs, which helps the watch wear better with a NATO or just hug your wrist better with a 2-piece. The crystal is a flat sapphire, which is always a bonus. And that brings us to the dial. There are 2 versions of the Heritage, the light and the dark. So on the dark side, we have a very nice chalkboard black dial with a glossy finish. Arabic numerals adorn the dial, and I don't believe they are applied, but they are a rather thick white paint with lume. Just beyond that, we have a train track chapter ring and lume dots for each hour. And a very simple date cutout is at the 3, which is black text on a white background. The dial is rather clean, except for a small logo at the top and a very small water resistance above the 6, which is small enough to let you know what the watch is without being overly distracting. And just below the 6, you have the very interesting American Assembled. One thing I really liked on Vaer's site was this journal section, which is really just a blog for the company. It has some interesting posts about what they're doing, and in some cases, why they're doing it. And 2 of the posts that I thought were interesting, I'll put links down below. One of which was on secondhand misalignment in quartz watches, and another on American Assembled versus Made in the USA, which I think is an interesting read as it highlights some of the challenges American companies have to face in a post-Shinola built-in-Detroit world. Back to the dial, white sword-shaped hands and a red second hand finish it up. The hands are a little shorter than I'd prefer, but otherwise I'd say they're very well done. And I especially love the red second hand, giving the design just a pop of color. Which also means that I really had to try it on this black and red NATO. Overall, I really like the dial design, and I think it plays very well with the case. The only thing I'd do different here would be to add some AR coating to that crystal, as that glossy black dial does tend to bounce the light around. And I have to say that I like the Heritage model better than any of their others. It's a simple but effective layout, and by channeling a vintage military design, it becomes a watch that looks fantastic, but isn't too formal. Something you could easily wear to work or in shorts and a t-shirt, which makes this watch perfect for what Vaer was trying to do, to make a great watch for any situation. Now let's talk lume before we get to the straps, and that's straps plural. And here I can say the Heritage is quite good when it comes to lume, with lume on both the hands as well as the hour indicators. The indicators are not quite as bright as the hands, and they are a typical greenish colored lume, while the hands are more of a cool blue color. I ran 2 comparison tests with the Heritage. To initially test it out, I paired it against my Timex Waterbury and a Boulder Venture, as well as this new Aviate. After 40 minutes, it easily beats the Timex and the Aviate, and I'd say it's on par, maybe a little better than the Boulder. So I'd say the lume isn't quite diver good, but for a field watch, it's great. To confirm that, I ran a second test, and I tried it against my Hamilton Khaki Aviation and the Vostok Amphibia. Initially, I'd say they're all pretty close, but after 40 minutes, the Vaer is just a little bit brighter than the Hamilton, and better than the Amphibia. So, as I said, the lume is quite good, and I can say firsthand that it will last through the night. So far you've seen this on a variety of different straps. I think I put it on around 7 in total, but 4 of those 7 actually come from Vaer. Normally their watches come with 2, but they were kind enough to send a variety for me to check out, so let's quickly go over them. 2 NATOs were sent, both a black and a green, and the NATOs are a good premium nylon. Not quite a seatbelt NATO, but it has a nice softer texture nevertheless. The stitching is quite good, and with signed hardware. I believe they charge about $15 for them by themselves, which is what I'd expect. Next is a single pass leather strap. Overall a vintage design, with white stitching near the buckle. The leather is quite good, which is actually expected as it is made in the USA from Horween leather. It's a very nice thick yet soft and flexible leather, with a signed buckle and a burnt signature on the inside. My only complaint, which is a very minor one, is that the inside of the leather is a little more rough and unfinished than the exterior, but that does suit the style. My favorite by far out of the 4 is this 2-piece Horween leather in a brown finish, which is what I prefer with a black dial. Especially with the white stitching near the case, I think it really completes a classic vintage field watch look. The leather is excellent and similar to the single pass, but with the addition of quick release on the straps. Regardless of which strap you pick, the watch wears equally as well. For myself, the size is perfect. It's not too big, not too small. Yet that dark black dial and white really let it pop and give it some great wrist presence. As I said before, a lug-to-lug of 48 is perfect for me. As you can see, the lugs seem to end right where my arm and wrist start to curve down, which lets the watch really hug my wrist. Combining that with the light weight and minimal height, make this a watch that you can really wear anywhere with anything. Let me briefly talk value before wrapping this whole thing up. Just like the Phoebus Sea Nymph a few weeks ago, it is priced a little higher than a lot of battery quartz watches on the market. But when you look at everything you're getting, I think it's well worth it and priced accordingly. Additionally, if you're going to compare this to say a Timex, you do need to compare it to the higher end Timexes made of steel, like say the Waterbury. And I can say firsthand that the fit and finish here is far better, not to mention sapphire, and that it was assembled in America, which isn't cheap. Although, just like when I've talked about Shinola in the past, it is a question on whether that really adds value. And it's very subjective and really up to you. If you're not from the US, you might not care at all. Speaking for myself, I think it does add value, and specifically because it is assembled in Southern California, which makes it a little special to me because I do have that personal connection. Now, I mentioned earlier that I think this is a really good watch if you live in California, and that's because California is a very unique place, not just culturally, but geographically, and especially Southern California. Now, Southern California is one of the few places that you could start your morning skiing in, say, Big Bear, make your way to one of the more desert cities for lunch, say in San Bernardino to have In-N-Out or maybe a taco shop, before you make your way to the beach in the afternoon. And you can still end your day by having a nice dinner out somewhere. So the perfect watch for someone living in California is a watch that looks just as good at work as while drinking a beer on the beach, yet is still tough enough for some outdoor activities, say biking or hiking in the middle of nowhere, as well as still have the water resistance to survive a day at, on, or in the water. And I have to say that the Heritage Dark does all of that in spades. So I can easily say that I really like this watch, and I can wholeheartedly recommend it to anyone. Especially if you're someone that's, say, interested in Shinola but thinks they're way overpriced. Or if you're someone that likes Timex but wants to take a step up. Or if you're just someone that wants one good-looking watch but doesn't want to dive headfirst into the mechanical world, then this is one to take a look at. And I'm eagerly waiting to see what their next watch is going to be, which is supposed to be their first automatic. In the meantime, let me know in the comments what you think about Vaer and the Heritage Dark. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for joining me.